Chapter 5, wherein the cavalry officer rides to the relief of an outlying outpost and engages a small force of Ansari in battle. There is no doubt that the arrival of additional cavalry units is a welcome development. You happily have your patrol assigned to the outpost's cavalry reserve. While this would require you to be ready to sortie in case of emergency, it would also allow your men to be present within the newly erected palisade and recently arrived comforts of the outpost at all other times. A welcome change from the monotony of patrol duty. With the outpost expanded into a full base of operations, the tempo of life has picked up. You cannot even drop by the enlisted barracks to check on your men without bumping into some newly arrived officer, happy to establish an acquaintance. With the new faces come a new attitude and new superiors. With Sir Enrique Hunter's promotion to Major, he no longer has the time to direct individual patrols. Instead, you must deal with a member of his newly appointed staff, Captain Daniel Lefebvre, a harsh and cynical man whose blunt and caustic manner strikes a sharp contrast with the gentlemanly Major Hunter. I don't think letters work like that. Yeah, certainly not in French. Nor in any other language that I know. You might be able to pronounce it in Slovenian, now that I think about it, but Over the next few weeks, the outpost expands dramatically. The newly arrived engineers build several wood and stone bunkhouses to shelter the new men. A high log palisade is raised. The cozy little camp which had served as your home for the past year is no more, replaced by a bustling little fortress complete with merchants, provosts, and houses of ill repute. You are temporarily joined in the reserve by the rest of the cavalry contingent, as new patrol routes are planned to accommodate the vastly expanded supply network linking the outpost to Narinja. Your men have a mixed reaction to the expanded amenities of the outpost. Although your dragoons still show up for drills and maintain their equipment properly, they begin to become more and more dissolute in the company of rougher, more crass company. Fenton, timid as he is hardly able to rein them in. Discipline suffers. For the most part, reserve duties are a relaxing change from the constant schedule of patrols you had grown used to. You feel the first warm breezes of late spring on your face as you make your morning rounds. It's a good feeling, knowing that you will no longer be ankle deep in mud or snow and that you'll finally be able to end the day with dry socks in the late sunset. Suddenly there is a commotion at the gate. A man clad in the ostentatious uniform of the White Rose Lancers gallops past upon a haggard-looking but still magnificent mount. The White Rose Lancers are the Duke of Warburton's personal guard unit and thus have been favoured with brilliant white tunics and sky-blue braid, which, you have no doubt, makes a far better impression on the ladies than your own green, grey and red. Paying you and his horse no heed, the Lancer tumbles easily off the saddle, clutching a folded sheet of parchment tightly in one hand. He rushes forward towards Major Hunter's office, collapsing into the arms of the sentries standing just beyond the door. A little bit shocked at what has just happened, you see the ornately dressed light cavalrymen disappear into the building. A moment later, a sentry peeks his head out of the door. Cornet Castleton, Major Hunter and Captain Lefebvre request your presence. You enter the office to see the two senior officers of the outpost standing with the lancer you saw earlier. You report yourself ready for duty and the two grenadier officers take you to the map table. Captain Lefebvre points at a dot on the map near the far side of the River Karan. As you well know, we've had a listening post on the far side of the River Karan for some time now. It is a relatively crude camp with limited defences and a very small garrison numbering perhaps a dozen. Major Hunter beckons the Lancer to approach. Only when you get a closer look do you realize that the man's ornate uniform bears merely the insignia of a lowly, non-commissioned soldier. Lance Corporal Kinsey has just ridden through the night from that camp. He has come to us with intelligence that the listening post is under light attack by the Antari. The garrison is holding, but it has apparently expended much of its supplies of shot and powder. The attacking force is reported to be quite sparse, but the Lancers are unsuited to fighting on foot. With the other units of horse on patrol, you remain the only force of cavalry available. We require your men to ride to the post with relief supplies of ammunition and assist them in dealing with any remaining assailants. The Major looks up to you, his expression serious. This is an undertaking of grave urgency, Cornet, and I will demand the greatest expediency from you. If you have any questions, ask them now. What defenses does the listening post have? Major Hunter asks the Lancer for an answer, but it is not an encouraging one. Lance Corporal Kinsey describes the listening post's lack of defense very succinctly. Aside from a crude fence made from bundled branches and a few strong points composed of piled logs, more for defense from the weather than from an earnest attack, the listening post has no defensive fortifications to speak of. Any other questions, Cornets? Why don't we send a larger relief thing on foot? Captain Lefebvre shakes his head. If we send a force on foot, it would take more than a day to reach the listening post. Such a delay could leave the garrison without ammunition long enough for the Antari to overwhelm them. In this case, speed trumps all other considerations. It shall have to be you. Who commands the listening post? Lance Corporal Kinsey describes the few virtues and many, many weaknesses of Lieutenant Carcour, his commanding officer, in great and bitter detail. Apparently, the man only has his commission because of powerful relatives in the courts. According to Kinsey, he is a man of unsound intelligence and entirely unsuited for any sort of combat. Most importantly, Kinsey blames him for ordering that the garrison stand and fight when they could have as easily melted into the forest. Lefebvre and Hunter listen with pained expressions. You get the expression that neither man would wish such a leader inflicted on any of the soldiers under their command. No other questions? Major Hunter steps forward as you finish with your questions. Very well. You are also permitted to engage any stragglers of the entire force that remain. As such, I am making the contents of the armory available to you. Should you feel the need to augment your striking power or the abilities of the listening post's lancers. You see Captain Lefebvre's face go sour. It is clear that Major Hunter's offer goes against the recommendations of his chief of staff. Still frowning, Lefebvre leads you to a squat stone armor building. You may requisition a few items from our stores if you absolutely must. Our supplies of munitions are limited, so try to avoid squandering them. You look over the weapons and supplies available to you. We've got hand grenades, extra shot and powder, infantry muskets. Yeah, we'd take the infantry muskets. Or do we take no. You strap 2 or 3 long infantry muskets to the side of each horse. Along with the powder and shot which your superiors have charged you with carrying, these weapons should prove to be enough to arm the entire garrison for a good fight. With the cumbersome muskets securely tied up, you and your men set off a little after 9 o'clock. You follow the old Imperial Highway down to Karan River Bridge. The conditions of the road have been much improved in recent months thanks to the diligent efforts of the Royal Engineers. Potholes have been filled, large stretches have been cobbled, and the path is now wide enough to accommodate 3 horses riding abreast. With the monotony of riding along a good road comes a certain mental wanderlust. Your thoughts quickly turn to the situation which must await you upon your arrival. From the snippets of conversation that you hear from those riding behind you, it seems your men are thinking the same thing. It seems proper that you should reassure them by telling them what they are likely to expect. You decide to tell them to expect a bit of a fight. You turn in your saddle, a calm expression on your face. There shouldn't be much to worry about, gentlemen. The Antari are probably bracing themselves for a fight, but we'll get through. It'll be a few bands of skirmishers, not an army. We've whipped them before, this time won't be any different. Your men don't seem too reassured by this, but they do stop grumbling for the rest of the trip. As the sun finally begins to sink towards the western edge of the summer sky, you spot the deforested hill upon which your destination stands. As you venture closer, you begin to see the signs of a fight. A body or 2 sprawled on the road and a few trees scorched with some sort of minor bane casting. All is silent as you announce yourself to the garrison of the listening post. You hear a sharp crack as something fast and metal passes by your head. You turn in time to see a musket ball smack into the trunk of a tree before you, before disappearing in a cloud of splinters. One of your men gives a sudden cry as he points into the forest. You follow his arm to see a handful of dark shapes and the glint of sun on metal. It seems the Antari have not been beaten back after all. More begin pouring out of the forest, muskets at the ready as you and your men spur your horses and make for the listening post at a hard gallop. Thankfully, the Antari, for all their numbers, are terrible shots. You and your dragoons manage to reach the makeshift wall of the listening post without suffering a single hit. The enemy continue to charge after you as your patrol stands trapped. The fence is too high to jump over, and you can see no entrance otherwise. The Antari get closer, and your men begin returning fire with their carbines. One of the enemy musketeers goes down, but another quickly grabs his weapon and takes his place. A half dozen ready their weapons as you and your men make to draw your sabres. More lead bolts whiz past your head, this time going the other way. 2 more Antari are struck down. The remainder turn and run for the forest. You twist in the saddle to see 8 heads poking above the fence, each wearing the distinctive high caps of the right rose lances. One of the lancers pushes open a section of fence clearly designed to be used as a sort of gate. With the way now clear, you and your men walk your horses inside. The listening post is very little more than a small enclosure inside the fence. Its only real structures are 3 tents, a latrine pit, and a small wooden shed half dug into the ground for the storage of supplies and weapons. A wide lean-to made of woven branches serves as a primitive stable. You and your men hitch your mounts to the crudely carved posts. As you finish tying up your horses, you are met by a man wearing sergeant's stripes. Despite his haggard appearance and stocky build, his uniform somehow makes him look more elegant than your entire unit combined. "Saints, look down on us with pity," he proclaims, the relief evident in his voice. "Kinsey got through. Tell me, what news do you bring? How many men has Major Hunter sent in after you? Who's commanding them?" His face seems to collapse when you tell him that no other help would be forthcoming. With a grim expression, he orders his men to begin unloading the supplies which you have brought. "Bloody excellent, that is. We were hoping for a relief column, a real one. More than that, we were hoping for a high officer to take the reins from our pig's arse of a commander." The sergeant fills you in on the situation. The Antari had attacked on the night before in a group of about half dozen. When that small force retreated, they had thought that the attackers had been driven off. Kinsey had been sent to request more supplies. Unfortunately, that morning the Antari had returned in a band of 30 or 40. The post has been under constant attack ever since. "Worst is that idiot Caracord thinks that we can outlast them. He sees no reason not to just sit here while we run out of food and powder. The second we fire our last shot, the Antari will come in with torches and burn this whole mess down around our ears." The sergeant points accusingly at a man sitting in the shadow of the largest tent. The subject of the sergeant's ire seems oblivious to his subordinate's harsh criticism, serenely cutting up his dinner with a silver knife and fork. A pistol and saber lie discarded beside him, and he seems to be paying very little heed to the dire situation around him. "There's the jackass right there. He won't listen to us, but maybe he'll take some wiser counsel than his own from another officer." Carcourt looks even more like a twit up close than he did from afar. His waxed moustache and immaculately cared-for uniform would make him seem out of place anywhere, save for perhaps at a high-class salon. You wait impatiently, holding your salute as he slowly takes a sip from his wine glass and finally acknowledges your presence. "What is it, sirrah? Can you not see I'm irrevocably occupied?" he exclaims without even looking up. It is only after you clear your throat that he realizes that he is addressing a fellow officer and not one of his own enlisted men. "If you've come from the main post, sirrah, you may tell Lord Wolfswood that our position is quite satisfactory and that I shall not need to be pestered by further visits." Your momentary confusion at the unfamiliar name is dispelled once you realize that the lieutenant is using Major Hunter's noble title, as if your commanding officer's military rank meant less than his standing in the courts. It has become abundantly clear just how lightly Carcourt takes his duties as a king's officer. You decide then and there, this Morin must be dealt with. You attempt to explain the wisdom of either withdrawing from the listening post or otherwise taking some sort of drastic action, but it seems that Carcourt's mind is set on its idiotic course. No matter how persuasive or even intimidating you get, the fool refuses to budge. You bite back a reply for as long as you can until you can stand the man no further. You open your mouth and spit a riposte, sharp and venomous. I'm assuming command. We'll see how that goes. Carcourt stands angrily, spilling his wine over his folding table. "How dare you, sir? This is my command. By what right does a cornet of barely cavalry rank over a lieutenant of the Duke of Warburton's own guards?" The lieutenant does have something of a point. There is no provision for this sort of thing. You could perhaps have him removed on grounds of mental instability, but that would require a surgeon, and regrettably no healers are present. You look around to see that some of the other lancers have gathered around, attracted by the sound of their commander's outburst. If you plan on convincing them to accept your command, you will have to make your argument quickly. Yeah, I'm definitely a better soldier. The other things, With a fluid motion, you draw your saber. At the whisper of steel, Carcourt stumbles backwards, clearly terrified. With all due respect, Lieutenant, I am sure these men would prefer to be led by a soldier than a peacock. And a few of the lancers nod approvingly, noting your firm stance and the well-maintained edge of your sword. With the issue of command finally settled, you and your newly acquired men take to defensive positions in preparation for the next Antari attack. Sure enough, in less than half an hour, you begin hearing the crack of musket fire coming from the trees around you. The Antari approach in a long, ragged line. Most wear little but homespun and carry nothing deadlier than improvised weapons made from farm implements. A few shoulder muskets and blunderbusses in a most unprofessional manner. At their head stands a man in a red surcoat, legs and arms covered in plate. In his hands he carries a long, exquisitely crafted musket shining with the blue light of Banecraft. Perhaps he is a petty noble leading his peasants in some futile resistance, or the elected head of a band of freeholders with a hodgepodge of scavenged weapons. It is certainly clear that this little war band is not a particularly professional force. The attackers halt at 80 paces. The musketeers run forward, weapons in hand. The lancers open up on them, 2 or 3 go down. Hitting a moving target at such a range is a difficult task for infantry, let alone cavalry unused to firing from beyond 20 paces. Your own dragoons have better luck. The sharp crack of your men's carbines join the duller cacophony of the Antari muskets and lancers' pistols. 3 more attackers fall. Most of the remaining Antari hurriedly scramble back to their lines as soon as they fire. Their poorly aimed balls fly wildly. Only their leader stands firm. Ignoring the bullets flying about him, he coolly levels his weapon and unleashes the bane spell enruined within. There is a loud boom, more like the sound of a cannon than a musket. You see a storm of lead shards issue from the flaming muzzle of the Antari rune gun, siphoning through the air like shrapnel. One of the lancers goes down, his brains shredded by a dozen flying fragments. Another falls, clutching the bloody ruin of his left arm. Beyond the smoke you hear a loud yell from the throats of 3 dozen men. Dark shapes appear through the powder smoke and coalesce into the silhouettes of armed men. The Antari burst out of the battle fog in a dead charge. The fight lasts for an hour. The Antari charge your men again and again, only to be driven back by concerted fire, leaving 1 or 2 of their fellows dead behind them each time. The enemy finally relents as the sun begins to set. You can see their campfires in the trees as they rest in preparation for another day's fighting. You are safe. For now. As you and your men sit down to your own meager rations, your sergeant sits himself down next to you, a worried expression on his face. I have just taken count, sir, and that last little fight used up almost all the ammunition we brought with us. The men barely have 2 cartridges each. If you've got a plan, we'd best hear it now. Before you can call for a meeting, Fenton turns to you again. Oh yes, and when you said there might be a bit of a scrap, the lads weren't expecting this sort of fight. This all took us by surprise, I know. I just wanted to tell you that the lads know that there was no way you could have known how big this would have been. After dinner you call your men, dragoons and lancers both, together to formulate a plan. You see several options available, none without some risk. First you could attempt a frontal assault, with the Antari demoralized and battered by the afternoon's battle. Now would be the best time for it. In such a battle the forest would give the Antari an advantage, and running out of ammunition might prove fatal in such a circumstance. It is a risky approach and one that relies on your abilities in direct combat more than anything else, but is also the most straightforward. Secondly, your dragoons could stage a diversion and gain the Antari's attentions whilst the lancers escape through the forest. If you are confident in the skirmishing skills and spirit of your dragoons, as well as your own ability to think quickly, oh no, we're not doing that, this would be an attractive, if risky plan. Lastly, you could attempt to bluff the enemy into leaving. This plan is probably the riskiest. A failed attempt would waste your precious time and likely boost the spirits of the enemy enough for them to attempt another attack. However, a convincing performance by a man of sufficient personal magnetism would mean victory without further casualties. Let's have another look at our stats. We're not intellectual. Definitely not. Our discipline is garbage. I think we're just running in there. Yeah. I think a frontal assault is the safest, in quotation marks, option, you decide upon the decisive but potentially disastrous option of a full attack under cover of night. Especially, like, a drawn-out fight isn't going to work. We're not going to be able to outsmart them. Certainly not us, and I don't really see anyone... The last option said something about charisma, I presume. Also certainly not our choice, not our forte. I mean, maybe one of our other officers or one of the other people we've got around here, but that's a bit too much. It's a bit too unclear for me. You and your men gather in a tight group, taking careful position around the makeshift gate. Slowly you push the bundled branches aside whilst keeping a sharp lookout for Antari sentries. With the coast cleared, a lot of you creep up to the edge of the forest. You sneak up until you can see the flames of the Antari cook fires glittering through the trees. Night blinded by the warmth of their fires, the Antari do not see their death as it approaches them. 2 of your dragoons pick out the sentries as the edge of the enemy camp. They bring their carbines to their shoulders and take careful aim. Crack. 2 carbines speak as one. The Antari pickets crumple to the ground. Your men give a great cheer and rush forward, picking off targets as they present themselves, reaving the trees in the smoke of gunfire and the screams of the wounded. The Antari regroup with a respectable quickness. With the vast majority of your ammunition expended, the fighting devolves into a bitter melee of men against men. You see a flash of red against the whirling lights of the Antari campfires. With barely a fort, you level your pistol and fire your last ball at it. You see the red surcoat fall to the ground with a sharp cry. You quickly make your way to the writhing body of the enemy commander. You point the tip of your saber at the fallen Antari's eye and thrust. The steel goes through the thin bone of his skull and into his brain. It is a merciful death, far quicker than a painful expiration from a pistol shot. By the time you look up, the fight is over. The few Antari left standing are running headlong for the deep forest. Those that remain are dead or have already given up. Your losses were heavy, but you have prevailed. Wearily, your men find their dead and wounded, dragging them back to the listening post for treatment or final rites. You sleep little that night, kept awake by the screams of the wounded and dying. Come the morning, you and your men depart to make your report to Major Hunter. The Lancers promise to allow Lieutenant Carcourt to reassume command, but only after the customary looting and apportioning of the spoils of last night's battle are tallied. Magnanimous in victory and grateful for their lives, the Lancers sergeant promises to send you the lion's share, Lieutenant Carcourt's share, in fact, of the loot. They send you off in grand style with 3 hurrahs and a saber salute. Your trip back to the main outpost is uneventful. You arrive a few hours before sunset, enough time to shave and get a quick meal before being ordered to report to Major Hunter and Captain Lefebvre for the debriefing. The 2 grenadier officers seem genuinely surprised by your drawn appearance. They had, after all, only expected you to make a simple courier trip. To see you returned after a day of harsh battle must be rather disconcerting for them. Lefebvre presses you for details, forced dispositions, the equipment of the enemy, the condition of the men you had fought beside, putting it all down in a notebook. Hunter remains silent as his subordinate asks you question after question. This goes on for a good half an hour. You elaborate upon the conditions of your mission, your losses, and your victories. Finally, the captain seems satisfied, putting down his notebook and giving a brusque nod. Now it is Major Hunter's turn. Leaning forward, he appraises you silently for a moment. His face breaks into a grim slash of a smile. He places his hand on your shoulder, the same way your father used to when you were little. Cornet, what you did out there was beyond anything I expected of you. You're truly a credit to your regiment and to His Majesty's army. However, I do have one matter on which I greatly desire your opinion. Knowing a serious question from your superior when you hear one, you lean in earnestly. We have had negative criticism about Lieutenant Carcourt in the past, but your report makes him out to be entirely unsuited for duty. Would you support that assessment? It is clear that the Major holds your opinion on this matter in high esteem. You come to the realization that your response, and by extension Major Hunter's report to High Command, could make or break the man's career. What do you think? He is incompetent. What exactly does censor him mean? Incompetent and a disgrace. I mean, he certainly is incompetent and a disgrace as an officer, But would I like to see his career in tatters? That seems a bit harsh. Maybe it's not harsh. Censor him. I don't know what that means. That's the problem. You know what? We're going for it anyway. Your response is critical but not overly cruel. Your assessment does not show the lieutenant in any kindly light, but it does mention each of his faults and mistakes in a clinical, impartial manner. In the end, it is a relatively merciful assessment, though you cannot help but conclude with your own low opinion of the man. The lieutenant, in my opinion, is unsuited for command. Perhaps he will still be of use elsewhere. Perhaps he may win promotion through some work away from the battlefield. As he stands now, he should not be trusted with the command of any unit in the field. Your superiors accept your assessment calmly. Over the next few days, they take the time to inform you that Carcourt has been transferred home to serve as a clerk in some musty office in Grenadier Square, his post given to a new officer which your ultimate superiors consider more suited. Whatever your feelings about the whole affair, you cannot help but think that you have saved a Lancer unit somewhere out there from a great deal of trouble. A few days later, a package wrapped in canvas arrives from the listening post, courtesy of the Rose Lancers. Inside sits the rune gun, which belonged to the Antari officer who your men had gunned down outside the branch wall. Accompanying it is a small scrap of parchment with a short message scribbled within. Your share, as promised, White Rose Lancers. The question of what to do with your newly acquired rune gun looms large in your mind. Having seen it used to deadly effect in the hands of a trained soldier, it is clearly a very powerful weapon when employed correctly. That being said, such enruned weapons are also extremely valuable, enough so that their sale is only legal when performed by nobility, such as yourself. After some thought, you decide to... how rich are we? 130. It's not bad. I think we're keeping it. We're a good soldier. We can make use of it. You decide to keep the weapon as your personal firearm. You go to the outpost's gunsmith to have the barrel cut down and the grip shortened. After a few days of work, you find yourself with a newly reworked carbine. The next morning, you take it out into the forest and fire off a few balls with it. You return with a satisfied grin, leaving the smouldering ruin of the trunk of a century-old pine tree behind as testament to your new weapon's power. With immediate events settled, you return to the monotony of reserve duty. Always required to be ready, you remain in barracks, drilling, writing, amusing yourself, and generally occupying yourself with the 1,000 little duties of soldiery which qualifies you to collect your pay, whilst waiting for another great emergency to pull you out of your fugue and into action once more. It never comes. Summer turns to autumn. Over the next few weeks, replacements trickle in to replace the men you have lost. Harvest season and the cold rains of the early winter pass without incident. The season of snow, ice, boredom, and disease passes as it always does, leaving you with no diversion save the occasional cremation of a frozen dead sentry or a poor fellow carried off by typhus or dysentery. Finally, the winter ends, and it is once again time to choose your duties for the coming year. We don't have the money to... No, we still don't have the money. But we're very good at soldiering. 77%. And we don't have the reputation either, so I guess we're returning to patrol duty. You inform Major Hunter and your men of your decision the next day.